The gavel came down like a gunshot. No echo. No pause. Just the sharp crack of wood against wood, and with it everything Kang Daejin had built over 19 years transferred to the woman sitting across the courtroom in a cream silk blouse, her legs crossed, her expression the kind of calm that only comes from someone who planned every move 3 seasons in advance. CO Yura did not flinch when they read the numbers. She just smiled. Barely. The kind of smile that doesn't move the eyes. And that right there. That smile was the first thing Zariah Cole noticed from the far end of the hallway, through the long rectangular window of the courtroom door, where she stood holding a dry cleaning bag that no longer had anywhere to be delivered. She wasn't supposed to be there. She was the help. She cleaned the estate on Tuesdays and Thursdays, pressed Daejin's suits on Fridays, and minded her business every single day in between because that was the arrangement, and arrangements kept people safe. But something had made her stay that morning. She didn't know what. Call it instinct. Call it the thing her late mother used to describe as the body knowing before the mind catches up. She watched through the glass as Daejin sat perfectly still while a court officer read out every asset, every account, every registered property and vehicle fleet, the estate in the Seongbuk Hills, the private compound in Jeju, the offshore accounts under 3 different corporate shells. One by one, they listed what he had built, and one by one, the law handed it across the room to his wife. Ex-wife, as of 11:42 that morning. The man being stripped of everything in that room did not move, did not blink faster than normal, did not grip the edge of the table, or exhale through his nose, or do any of the things a man does when he is losing. His hands sat flat on the oak surface in front of him. His posture was straight. His face carried no reading, and that unsettled Zariah in a way she could not name, because she had seen Daejin angry. She had seen him sharp and cold and cutting when a deal went wrong. She had seen him throw a crystal glass against a wall at 2 in the morning and then go completely quiet for 6 days after. She knew what this man looked like when something mattered to him. This was not that. This was something else. She is a woman who notices things most people walk right past. That was always her gift, and depending on the day, her heaviest burden. She sees the way silence changes shape depending on who is holding it. She sees the thing behind the thing. Right now, standing in that hallway in a country that was never supposed to be permanent for her, holding a dry cleaning bag for a life that had just legally ended, she was seeing something that made no sense. Daejin did not look like a man losing everything. He looked like a man watching a plan complete itself. Welcome, by the way. If this is your first time here, you found the right channel. This is Afro-Korean Films, where the stories go places you don't see coming. Subscribe and come all the way in. The proceedings took 40 minutes. Zariah counted. When it ended, Yura stood first. She buttoned her blazer with 2 clean movements, exchanged a word with her attorney, and walked out through the side door without looking back. The heels of her shoes struck the marble floor at even intervals, measured, unhurried, deliberate. The sound moved through the corridor like a quiet announcement. The estate is mine. The accounts are mine. The cars, the companies, the name, mine. She was gone before Daejin even rose from his chair. He stood slowly. His attorney said something to him in a low voice. Daejin nodded once. That was it. He picked up nothing from the table because there was nothing to pick up. No briefcase, no phone, no folder. Just the charcoal gray suit he had worn in, now carrying the weight of a finished chapter. He walked out of the courtroom through the main doors. Zariah stepped back from the window before he could see her, pressed herself flat against the wall, the dry cleaning bag crinkling once in protest. She held her breath. His footsteps passed her. Slowed. Stopped. She pressed harder into the wall, then they continued. Down the hall, through the heavy double doors at the far end, gone. She exhaled. But the unease didn't go with him, because Zariah Cole had cleaned that estate for 2 years. She had seen Daejin pace the length of the great room on late nights, talking on calls in Korean she only partially understood. She had folded his shirts and organized his study and learned, without ever meaning to, the shape of his daily life. She had also seen things that never made it into any conversation. The night, 4 months ago, when he came home through the back entrance with a cut above his left ear and mud on shoes that cost more than her rent. He had said nothing. She had said nothing. She cleaned the floor after him and pretended, because pretending is a skill you develop when you work in other people's houses. The afternoon she overheard Yura on a call, speaking too quietly for the words to land clearly, but with a sharpness in her tone that didn't match the casual posture she was performing, leaning against the kitchen counter, examining her nails, voice low and controlled, and aimed at someone who was not Daejin. The documents she had seen, once, spread across Daejin's desk, not the business ones he left out openly, but a different kind. Thicker. Older paper. She had looked long enough to register that she should stop looking. Then she walked away and cleaned the bathroom instead. Now, standing in an emptying courthouse corridor, Zariah thought about all of it. And she thought about how, in 2 days, she would be sent to the estate one final time to clean and inventory the staff quarters before Yura's people took full possession. She thought about the far end of the property, the eastern section past the second garden wall that no landscape crew ever touched, that she had always been told without explanation to leave alone. She had assumed it was a groundskeeping thing. Now she wasn't sure. The corridor was almost empty. The overhead lights buzzed faintly. Outside, a car door slammed and an engine turned over and the city moved forward without ceremony, the way cities always do when individual lives are rearranged beyond recognition. Zariah folded the dry cleaning bag over her arm and walked toward the exit. She had a job to finish. Or maybe, she thought, something was just beginning. What do you think Zariah is going to find at that estate? And do you think Daejin really lost everything? Or was that courtroom moment exactly what he wanted? Drop your answer below. Watch Chapter 2 before you decide. Chapter 2. By morning, the story had already been written for him. The headline on the financial news site read, Kang Daejin, the collapse of Korea's ghost billionaire. Beneath it, a photo from 3 years ago, him exiting a black SUV outside his Gangnam Tower, jaw set, eyes forward, the kind of image that had once communicated power, and now, with 2 words of caption underneath it, communicated ruin. The article was 12 paragraphs long. Zariah read it on her phone while the subway carried her north toward the estate, standing in the crowded car with her shoulder pressed against the pole, the words moving through her like cold water. It said Kang Daejin had been over-leveraged, said his wife had uncovered years of mismanagement hidden beneath a polished corporate image, said that behind every controlled public appearance was a man quietly drowning in bad debt and worse decisions, said that Seo Yura, in choosing to separate her holdings and file for dissolution, had made the only rational move available to her. It said she was sharp. It said she had acted decisively. It did not say what Zariah had seen in that courtroom. It could not. The article had no access to the way Daejin had sat through the reading of his losses with the posture of a man attending someone else's funeral. No journalist had been positioned at that hallway window. None of them had watched his hands rest flat and still on the oak table, while 19 years of accumulated wealth transferred to the woman across the room. None of them had noticed that he never flinched. Zariah locked her phone and looked up at the moving faces around her. Commuters, students, a man in a delivery jacket asleep against the back wall. Everyone doing what the city required, moving, surviving, minding their lane. She was good at minding hers, but she could not stop thinking about what she had seen. By the time she reached the estate, the outer gates were already staffed by 2 people she didn't recognize. Young, suited, carrying clipboards. They checked her name against a list and let her through without warmth or explanation. Yura's people. Moving fast. Getting to work. Inside, the estate felt different. Not visually. Everything was where it had always been. The pale stone floors, the low furniture, the framed pieces on the walls, the orchids in the east window that Zariah watered twice a week without fail. Everything was in place, but the air was different. The silence was the kind that comes after a decision has been made and the consequences have started arriving. 3 other staff members moved through the main rooms, also carrying out their final duties. They spoke in low voices when they spoke at all. The housekeeper, Mrs. Song, moved with the careful efficiency of someone who had seen household endings before and understood that the only dignified response was to do your job cleanly and leave. Zariah tied her hair back and started in the staff quarters. She worked in silence, stripping linens, bagging personal items, moving through each small room with the practiced invisibility of someone who had learned to reduce her presence to the minimum required. It was a skill. She had developed it the same way she had developed most of her useful skills, by being somewhere she was welcomed but not truly seen, and making that work in her favor. She saw things when people forgot she was in the room. It was in those spaces, the in-between moments, the margins of other people's important days, that Zariah had assembled her real understanding of the Kang household. Not from conversations, from details, like the fact that Daejin always reviewed documents twice, once quickly, once slowly, and the second reading was always alone, always after Yura had gone to whatever room she retreated to in the evenings. Like the fact that in 2 years of working the estate, she had never seen him visibly intoxicated, never seen him lose a phone, never seen him misplace anything of importance. A man that controlled about the details of his daily life did not mismanage a financial empire into collapse. That did not track. She moved through the second staff room and into the narrow corridor that connected to the service wing. Through the window at the end of the hall, she could see part of the estate grounds, the manicured main garden, the stone path toward the east wall and beyond it, just visible through a gap in the overgrown hedgerow, the beginning of the untended section. She had asked about it once, casually, in passing, in the way you ask about things you've filed away but haven't forgotten. The groundskeeper, an older man named Mr. Huang, had shrugged and said the eastern section wasn't part of the active grounds plan, that it had been left deliberately, that she shouldn't need to go there. She hadn't pushed it. You learn, in her line of work, which questions to let drop. But standing at that window now, with the estate in its final hours before new ownership took permanent hold, she felt the weight of that unanswered question differently. Why would a man who controlled every detail of his life leave a full section of his estate, his most private and secure property, untended and undocumented? One of the clipboard people knocked on the door frame behind her, asked if she had finished the linen inventory. She said yes and held out the list. He scanned it, nodded, and moved on. She went back to work. But the question didn't move with him. She thought about the articles again, the ones calling it collapse, the ones framing Yura as the rational actor and Daejin as the cautionary tale. She thought about how easy it is to write a story when the person you're writing about says nothing to correct it. And she thought about what kind of man chooses silence when the whole world is filling that silence with a version of events that destroys him. Only 2 kinds. A man who has genuinely given up, or a man who is letting the world believe exactly what it needs to believe. She had known Daejin long enough to know which one was more likely. By midday, she had completed her assignment in the main building. Mrs. Song confirmed it. The clipboard people logged it. Everything by the book. She gathered her bag from the small room near the service entrance and prepared to sign out. And then she heard it. One of the asset documentation team, a woman in her 30s with a red lanyard, was on a call near the kitchen corridor, reading from her clipboard in a fast, efficient voice. Listing rooms, listing annexed spaces, ticking boxes, East Wing, listed, West Garden Extension, listed, Northern Storage Units, listed. She paused, flipped a page, read again, flipped back. There's a gap in the property schematic here, she said to whoever was on the other end of the call. Eastern perimeter past the second wall. It's on the land title, but nothing is registered on this map. We'll flag it for the surveyor. She moved on. Zariah didn't. She stood in the corridor for 3 full seconds, the bag over her shoulder, her breathing even. Something on the land title that wasn't registered anywhere else. A gap. In the paperwork of a man who never misplaced anything of importance. That wasn't an accident. She looked toward the window at the end of the service corridor, the gap in the hedgerow, the untended section beyond the second garden wall. She looked at her watch. She had 40 minutes before she needed to sign out. She picked up her bag and walked toward the door, but not the front door, the east-facing one. What did you think Daejin was really doing while Yura was busy taking everything? And that gap in the property map, you think that was an accident? Leave your thoughts below. Chapter 3 is about to change how you see this whole story. Chapter 3. Zariah had learned silence the hard way. Not the comfortable kind, not the silence of Sunday mornings or slow rain, the kind that is survival. Adaeze the kind a child learns when the adults around them are either angry or gone, and the safest thing to do is to become small enough that the world forgets you're standing in it. She had grown up in Brixton, South London, in a flat that smelled like jollof rice and old wood. Her mother, Adaeze Cole, had come from Lagos with 2 suitcases and a stubbornness that other people frequently mistook for pride. She worked 12-hour shifts at a care home on the other side of the city and came home each night still moving, still going, still holding the house together with nothing but will and routine. She used to tell Zariah, "Be so quiet that people forget to lie to you, then you'll hear everything." Zariah had carried that her whole life. She had carried it from London to Seoul, which was not the obvious destination for a 28-year-old Black British woman with a hospitality background and a mother who had just been buried and a life that had temporarily stopped making sense. She had come here on a short-term work placement with a staffing agency that supplied household staff to high-net-worth clients in the city's northern districts. It was supposed to be 6 months. That was 2 years ago. She stayed because she was good at the work. She stayed because Seoul had a rhythm she could walk inside without being consumed by it. She stayed because the Kang estate, for all its cold precision and marble silence, was the first place since her mother died where she felt useful without feeling invisible. Mostly, she stayed too because she was still watching. That was the thing about Adaeze Cole that no one who employed her ever fully understood. She was always watching. Not suspiciously, not with intent. Just the way some people listen to music for the melody and some hear every individual instrument playing. She heard every instrument. She had heard the instrument of this household for 2 years. She had heard Yura's voice shift register when she spoke to certain people on the phone versus others. A lower, more controlled tone that appeared maybe twice a week, always in the kitchen, always when she believed no one was nearby. Not secretive nervous, secretive calculated. The difference mattered. She had heard the way Daejin moved through his own home like a man navigating a space he was occupying rather than inhabiting. Not uncomfortable, never that, but measured, aware. Like a person who has long accepted that every room they are in is also a room they might need to exit quickly. She had seen him, 7 weeks before the divorce proceedings started, standing at the window of his private study at 6 in the morning. Still dressed. She had arrived early that day because a pipe in her apartment building had burst and made sleep impossible. She let herself in through the service entrance and moved quietly toward the kitchen. And through the open study door, she saw him standing at the window with a glass of water, looking out at the unlit garden. Not pacing, not on the phone, just standing. Still. She had not spoken. She had continued to the kitchen. But before she moved out of the sightline of that doorway, she had glanced once more. He was still standing there, and in his left hand, set held loosely at his side, was a single sheet of paper. She hadn't seen what was on it. She had been a good 10 feet from the door, and the room was only lit by the gray pre-dawn coming through the glass. But she had seen his face in profile. Not afraid. Not defeated. Something much colder than both. Focused. Now she moved across the back edge of the estate, past the second garden wall where the stone changed texture from smooth dressed to rough and older, and the grass underfoot became a different color, darker, longer, no longer managed. The morning's brief warmth had shifted. It was cooler back here. The trees were denser, mostly pine, and they pressed close enough to the wall that she had to angle herself sideways through one gap to stay on the property boundary. She checked her watch. 32 minutes. The eastern section of the property was maybe half an acre, she guessed. Enough to be significant. Enough to deliberately not be on a document when everything else was. She walked carefully, watching her footing, the long grass catching at her ankles. There was no path, or there hadn't been one in a long time. She almost missed it. A narrowing between two pine trees, the kind of space that, if you weren't looking closely, registered as just another gap in the tree line. But the ground between them was subtly different, slightly more compressed, as if weight had passed through here repeatedly over time, and the earth had simply accepted it. Not recently, but not never. She stepped through. The trees thinned slightly on the other side and the terrain leveled. She moved through a stretch of tall grass that reached her waist, arms out slightly for balance, watching where her feet landed. Then the grass gave way. And there it was. She almost stopped walking entirely. It was small. Single room by the look of the exterior, built with dark timber planks that had weathered to almost black over years of exposure. A flat-edged roof, a single window on the near wall with no curtain. The foundation was stone, old stone, the same rough-dressed type as the far garden wall, which meant whoever built this had used matching materials deliberately, the way you do when you want something to belong. It looked like nothing from a distance. That was clearly the point. But it was not abandoned. That was the first thing she clocked. The timber was weathered but not rotting. The ground immediately around it was clear of fallen debris, not swept clean, but maintained to a standard that said someone has been here within the last season. There was no padlock on the door, just a simple lever handle, the kind that looks old but isn't. Zariah stood at the edge of the cleared ground and looked at it. Her mother's voice arrived, the way it still did sometimes, at the back of her mind. You don't have to open every door, but you have to be honest about why you don't. She took one breath. Then she crossed the ground to the door. The handle moved smoothly under her hand, no resistance, no rust screech, and the door swung inward. It was dark inside. Then her eyes adjusted, and the door was already open, like someone had expected her. No, not expected. Like someone had left it open for when the right person arrived. Think about it. A man like Daejin, who controlled every single detail of his life, just happens to leave a hidden structure completely off the legal documents, off the survey maps, with a door that's unlocked and maintained. Is that a mistake, or is it something else? Tell me below. Chapter 4 is where everything changes. Chapter 4. The smell hit her first. Dry wood and old paper and something underneath both of those. Machine oil, faint and metallic, the kind that lingers in rooms where careful work gets done. Not a smell you find in abandoned spaces. This was the smell of a room that had been used deliberately and had been waiting in stillness since. Zariah stood in the open doorway and let her eyes finish adjusting. The interior was a single room, maybe 15 feet by 12. The light came through the one window she had seen from outside, and it fell across the space in a long, pale rectangle that caught the dust rising from the floorboards where her footfall had disturbed them. That was the only disorder. Everything else was its opposite. A work table ran along the full length of the wall opposite the door. Wood surface, no finish, but solid. On it, 3 flat storage boxes, closed, stacked in a column at the left end. A single lamp, no bulb in it, but positioned deliberately. A wide format binder, thick, the kind that holds physical documents behind clear sleeves. And beside it, a smaller one, black cover, unmarked. On the wall above the table, nothing, just the timber planks. But there were rectangular marks where things had hung and been removed cleanly, not torn away but taken down with care. To her right, a low shelf built directly into the wall, 4 levels. The top 2 held slim external drives, 6 in total, each one sealed in a small Ziploc bag and labeled with a handwritten code. Letters and numbers. Nothing that read as a word. To anyone looking, it would be filing. To Zariah, looking carefully, it was something arranged with intent. The codes written in the same ink, in the same hand, suggesting they had been labeled in one sitting by one person. To her left, a wooden chair, straight-backed, and on the seat, a single folded cloth. Military neat, like someone placed it there the last time they sat, stood up, folded it, and set it down as a kind of punctuation. She stepped fully inside, the floorboards held without a sound. Old timber, yes, but reinforced somehow. She felt the difference in the solidity underfoot versus the soft age she would have expected. She approached the table. The wide format binder was closed with a single elastic band looped diagonally across the cover. She touched it, hesitated, then lifted it and laid it flat and removed the band. The first sleeve held a document she recognized the format of immediately, a corporate registration. But not Korean, Swiss. The company name was in 3 words she didn't know. Beneath it, a second document, same format, same country, different name, then a third, then a fourth from a jurisdiction she didn't recognize at all. Somewhere in the Pacific Islands, she thought, though the letterhead was minimal and the language was English. She turned to the next section. Financial statements. Column after column of numbers that made no sense in the context of what the court had just confirmed as Daejin's total assets. The figures here didn't match. Not even close. The accounts the court had frozen, the assets the legal team had valued and transferred. They were, she now saw, looking at something that dwarfed them. These numbers were a different order of magnitude. She turned again. Slower now. Equity structures, partnership agreements, layered ownership chains, each company owned by another company owned by another. Paper trailing back through 6 or 7 entities before arriving at a name she didn't recognize. A name that appeared at the end of every chain, always the same, always at the base, like a root no one had thought to dig for. She flipped to the back section of the binder. And there, in the final sleeve, was a single sheet of notepaper. Plain, unlined, handwritten in black ink in Korean, was with one line translated underneath it in English. She could see the faint pencil marks of it, as if someone had wanted to make sure it would be understood if found. She read the English line. If everything is taken, this is what remains. Zariah stood very still, the paper in her hand, the binder open on the table, the coded drives on the shelf, the corporate chains pointing to a name the court had never heard. The numbers that made the frozen accounts look like a decoy, because that was what they were. She understood it now, fully and without room for another interpretation. The court case had not been a loss. It had been a removal, a controlled, calculated disappearance from the visible layer of his own financial empire, while the real structure remained here, untouched, undiscovered, waiting. The question was not whether Daejin still had power. The question was what he was building it toward. She closed the binder slowly, set it back exactly as she had found it, re-looped the elastic band the same diagonal way, set the binder back in its position on the table. She needed to think. She needed to... You weren't supposed to find that. The voice came from directly behind her. Low, controlled, male. She did not spin around. She had learned a long time ago that spinning around is what fear does. Instead, she straightened her spine and turned at a normal pace, one full rotation until she was facing the open doorway. He filled it. Kang Daejin. Not in the charcoal court suit, in dark clothing, plain, nothing branded, the kind of thing you wear when you don't want to be described. He stood with one hand on the door frame and his eyes moving the room once, quickly, professionally, before they settled on her. He did not look angry. He did not look surprised. He looked like a man who had calculated this possibility and had simply been waiting to see which version of it arrived. "How long have you been here?" she asked. "Long enough," he said. And then neither of them spoke. And the silence in that room, in that hut, on that untended eastern edge of a property the world now believed belonged to someone else, was the most specific silence Zariah had ever stood inside. Because it wasn't the silence of danger. It was the silence of two people realizing, at the same moment, that the thing they were standing in the middle of was much larger than either of them had expected, and that neither of them could walk away from it now. So, Daejin planned all of this. He let Yura take what he wanted her to take. He hid the real empire in plain sight, off every document, off every map, and Zariah just found it all. The question is, why did he let her? He could have stopped her at the garden wall. He could have stopped her in the hallway at the courthouse. He didn't. Was that a mistake? Or does Daejin already know something about Zariah that she doesn't know about herself? Leave your answer below. Chapter 5 is where the truth inside the truth comes out. Chapter 5. He stepped inside and closed the door. Not with force, not with the controlled drama of someone making a point. He simply reached back, caught the edge of it with 2 fingers, and drew it shut behind him. The sound it made, a soft, definitive click, changed the room completely. The pale rectangle of window light was all they had now, and in it, Daejin's face was half lit, half shadow, and entirely unreadable. Zariah did not step back. She held her position beside the table, one hand resting lightly on its edge, not gripping it, not leaning on it, just present. She had learned that the body communicates before the mouth does, and she was careful, always, about what hers said. He scanned the room once more. His eyes moved to the binder, the elastic band, the position of the black-covered folder, then back to her. "You replaced everything," he said. "I found it exactly as it was. I left it that way." Something passed through his expression. Brief, contained. Not approval, precisely, but something adjacent to it. He moved to the chair on the left side of the room, turned it slightly, sat down, not the posture of a man backed into a corner, the posture of a man who had been waiting a long time to sit in a room where the performance was finally over. Zariah remained standing. "The asset team flagged a gap in the property survey today. Eastern perimeter. They're sending a surveyor." "I know," he said. "How?" "Because I've had someone monitoring the documentation process since the transfer was filed." He looked at her directly. "The surveyor will find nothing they recognize. The structure isn't on any architectural record that corresponds to this land title. By the time they cross-reference correctly, the relevant documents in the main system will already have a resolution note attached. Technical error. Corrected. Closed." She absorbed that. "You planned for a surveyor." "I planned for every variable I could calculate." "And me?" He didn't answer immediately. He looked at her with the same quality of attention she had seen in him at 6 in the morning at the study window. Not reactive, not defensive, but the focused stillness of someone running a full assessment in real time. "You were a variable I had assigned a low probability," he said. "You were given the Eastern cleaning assignment as a separation task, away from the main inventory. That detail was not accidental. It was meant to give you space to finish your work without being caught in the documentation team's sweep." He paused. "I did not expect you to follow the gap." "You left the door unlocked." "I leave it unlocked," he said. "Always. Locks draw attention to things worth locking." She let that sit. Then, "So you didn't plan for me to find this, but here I am." "Here you are, and you're not—" She stopped, restarted. "You're not angry." "No." "Why?" He reached forward and opened the wide format binder. Not to a specific page, just opened it and let it lay there between them. An offering, or a question. "Because," he said, "you read it. You understood what you were looking at. And then you put everything back exactly as you found it before you turned around." He closed it again. "That tells me something." Zariah watched him. "What does it tell you?" "That you're not afraid of information, But you understand that knowing something and using it are two different decisions." She said nothing. Because he was correct and they both knew it. He leaned back, the chair held without protest, sturdy despite its age. He looked at the drives on the shelf for a moment, then at the window, then back to her. "Sit down," he said. "Not an order. The way you say it to someone when you've decided the conversation is going to take longer than either of you initially intended." She pulled the chair from the table and sat, facing him. He spoke for a long time, not everything. She understood that. There were layers beneath layers in this room, and he was not a man who gave away more than the moment required. But enough. He spoke about the structure visible in the binder, enough for her to understand that what the court had evaluated and transferred was real. It was his. It had been his, and it was now Yura's by law. And it was also not the thing that mattered. The offshore holdings, the layered corporate ownership, plus the equity positions buried under 6 different jurisdictions, those had existed in parallel for years, built carefully, built quietly, built in the spaces between the life he showed the world and the calculation running underneath it. He had not been hiding wealth from Yura because he suspected the divorce. He had built the separation long before there was a marriage to separate from. Because a man who moves in the circles Daejin moved in, syndicate adjacent, never fully inside but never fully outside, does not consolidate. He segments, he layers, he ensures that no single event, legal or otherwise, can touch the core. Yura had taken everything she was supposed to take. She just didn't know "supposed to" was the operative phrase. "But she didn't find this," Zariah said. "No one found this," he said. "In 19 years. Because you never told anyone it existed." "Because I never told anyone it existed." Zariah looked at the drives on the shelf. 6, each one sealed, labeled with codes that meant nothing to anyone who hadn't generated them. "What's on those?" she asked. He was quiet for a moment. Then, "The evidence that proves why the divorce happened the way it did." He stood, went to the shelf, stood in front of it without touching anything. Yura did not arrive at the decision to file on her own. She was guided to it. Every document she used in the asset assessment, the financial records, the corporate valuations, the debt structures she presented as evidence of mismanagement, they were fed to her. Zariah went still. Someone gave her the case. Someone built the case for her. And then made sure she believed she had found it herself. He turned from the shelf. "They wanted me weakened, not destroyed. A destroyed man is a dead end, a weakened one is useful. He can still be leveraged, threatened, bargained with. A man who has publicly lost everything is much easier to control. But you disappeared from the board entirely." "Exactly. So now they don't know where to apply pressure. Now I'm not on the board, they're watching." He looked at her steadily. "Which means I can move." She held his gaze. "Move toward what?" He reached past her and opened the black-covered folder she hadn't opened. Inside the first page, a list of names. She recognized 2 of them from Korean financial media. One of them she recognized from something else, a name that had come up once, in a conversation she had overheard at the estate. A conversation between Yura and the person on the other end of that low, controlled call. The hut, which had felt small when she entered it, felt very different now. "You weren't supposed to find this," he said again. But this time it didn't sound like a warning. It sounded like the beginning of something. And then, outside the single window, a sound. Dry leaves, compressed underfoot. One step, then a second. The specific rhythm of someone moving carefully through the tall grass at the edge of the cleared ground. Daejin heard it the same moment she did. He closed the black folder in one motion, looked at her, and in his eyes, for the first time since she had turned to find him in that doorway, she saw something that was not calculation. Something urgent. "I don't move," he said quietly, "and don't look at the window." "So let me ask you this. Someone already knows about the hut. Daejin built this whole thing in silence for 19 years, and within 1 day of the asset transfer, there are footsteps outside. That is not a coincidence. Who do you think is out there? And now that Zariah has seen those names, do you think she's safe? Tell me what you think below. Chapter 6 is where Daejin stops explaining and starts deciding. And everything moves faster from here. Chapter 6. The footsteps stopped. That was the part that made Zariah's chest tighten. Not the sound of someone approaching, but the sudden absence of it. Because movement that stops deliberately is worse than movement that continues. It means the person outside made a decision. It means they heard something too, or saw something, or reached the exact position they were moving toward. Daejin was already on his feet. He hadn't scrambled, hadn't knocked anything over. He rose from the chair the way water rises, smooth, continuous, without wasted motion, and crossed to the shelf in 4 quiet steps. His hands moved over the drives without looking at them, checking each seal by touch. Then he turned to the table, scanned the surface, and repositioned the black folder 2 inches to the left, back to its original placement, she realized. He was resetting the room, not panicking, accounting. Zariah stayed exactly where she was. She was good at stillness, had been since childhood. When the world outside her mother's flat got loud and unpredictable, she had learned that the body's best defense was sometimes to simply become part of the furniture. She breathed low. Watched him. He moved to the wall beside the window, not in front of it, beside it, and looked out from the extreme edge of the frame where his silhouette would not register from outside. 1 second, 2, 3. Then he stepped back. 1 person, he said quietly, staying at the tree line. Watching the hut? Watching the door. She processed that. Watching the door meant they already knew the hut existed, which meant this was not a surveyor who had wandered off the documented path. This was someone who had come here with the location already in hand. Who knows about this place? She asked, keeping her voice below the level the walls would carry. No one. He paused. That was the design. Then someone found the design. He looked at her. And she saw it again. That shift she had caught in the last minutes of Chapter 5, the thing beneath the calculation. Not fear. Something more specific than fear. The recognition that a system he had built over 19 years with extraordinary precision had just produced a result he had not entered into the equation. They're not here for the hut, he said, more to himself than to her. Then, adjusting, they're here because they followed you. Zariah felt that land. She turned it over, retraced her morning, the subway, the estate gates, the clipboard team, the corridor, the window, the gap in the hedgerow. She had not been subtle, she had simply been unremarkable, which was a different thing entirely, and apparently not enough. I didn't see anyone follow me from the gate. You wouldn't. These people don't follow visibly. He came back to the center of the room, stood in the window light with his arms at his sides. They track through other means. You signed in at the gate today under your name. That list was photographed within 20 minutes of you entering the property. She went quiet. By who? By whoever is managing the monitoring of this estate transition on behalf of the people who arranged it. He looked at the door. They saw your name. They know you worked here. They don't know what you know, but they know you were here today after the transfer in the east section. That's enough for them to send someone. To do what? He met her eyes. To see what you found. The word found carried everything. She felt the full weight of where she was standing, in a room full of evidence that could restructure global financial networks, with a man the world believed was finished, and an unknown person stationed 30 feet away in the tree line, watching the door. She had come here on an instinct, a question that wouldn't leave her alone, and now she was inside an answer she hadn't fully accounted for. What do we do? She asked. Daejin's expression didn't change, but something in his posture did, a small adjustment in the shoulders, a realignment so slight that most people would miss it entirely. She didn't miss it. She had been reading body language in service of other people's lives for long enough to know when a decision had been made. You leave, he said, through the main grounds. Walk directly to the front gate. Sign out. Go home. And if they follow me from here, they will. Which is why your behavior needs to look like exactly what it was. A cleaning staff member completing a final assignment. Nothing more. He held her gaze. Do not look toward the tree line. Do not alter your pace. Do not take your phone out until you are off the property. She nodded once. Slow. She was already composing herself for it, adjusting the setting on her face, pulling the professional stillness back over everything she currently felt. And you? She asked. He said nothing for a moment. Then, I stay. In here. This is the only place I have left that isn't watched. He looked around the room. For now. She picked up her bag from where she had set it near the table, settled it on her shoulder, moved toward the door. Zariah. She stopped. But he had never used her first name before. In 2 years of working the estate, it had always been Miss Cole, or nothing at all. She turned. You said you put everything back exactly as you found it. His voice was even. Before you turned around, before you knew I was there. Yes. Why? She considered several answers, landed on the only true one. Because whatever it wasn't mine to disturb. He looked at her for a long moment. Go, he said, and don't come back here alone. She opened the door, crossed the cleared ground without looking at the tree line, and walked back through the long grass, through the gap in the hedgerow, through the second garden wall, across the estate grounds, upright, even-paced, unremarkable. While somewhere behind her, in the quiet eastern section that no document had ever registered, a man sat down in a wooden chair and began to think, and in the tree line something watched her go. So, they already knew about the hut. Not the contents, not yet, but the location. And they were watching. The question is, who told them? Who photographed that sign-in list? And why does Daejin not seem frightened, only recalculating? Drop your answer below. Chapter 7 is coming, and the name behind all of this is about to surface. You are not ready. Chapter 7. The fire started at 3 in the morning. Not a large one. Controlled, almost surgical, the kind that is meant to send a message rather than cause total destruction. The eastern section of the estate caught first, the dry grass going fast, and by the time the night security contractors Yura had hired reached the outer wall, the flames had licked the base of 2 pine trees and scorched the ground in a 10-foot radius around a structure that, according to every property document on file, did not exist. They put it out in under 20 minutes, logged it as a brush fire. Probable cause, an unattended cigarette or a fault in the groundskeeping equipment stored in the unmaintained section. The report landed in Yura's property management email at 6:47 that morning. She read it at her dressing table, still in her robe, coffee in one hand, and for 3 full seconds she was completely motionless. Then she set the coffee down, called her attorney, asked one question. Was there a structure in the eastern section? The attorney said he'd follow up. He came back 40 minutes later and said the surveyor had flagged the area but found nothing architecturally significant. Weathered timber debris consistent with an old groundskeeping shed. Nothing registered, nothing of value. Yura ended the call, sat very still in her dressing room, because whoever had started that fire was not after dry grass and pine trees. They were after something in that section. And the fact that the surveyor had found nothing architecturally significant told her not that the section was empty, but that whatever was in it was no longer there. Which meant Daejin had moved it. Which meant Daejin was still operating. And that was the detail no one had prepared her for. Zariah heard about the fire from Mrs. Song, Ace who heard about it through the household network that persists long after households dissolve. The quiet, efficient exchange of information among people who have worked the same rooms and whose lives remain connected even when the employer is gone. The message came through on her phone at 7:15 while she was standing in her apartment kitchen in Mapo district, drinking tea and watching the early news with the sound low. She put the mug down, read the message twice, did not reply immediately. Then she got dressed. She had told herself the night before, walking off that estate with someone watching her from a tree line, that she was done. that she had stumbled into something that had nothing to do with her, and the correct move was to recognize the boundary and stay behind it. She had a life here. Small, yes, and not what she had planned at 28, but hers. She had a job to find now that the Kang estate contract was closed. She had rent and routines and a sensible arrangement with reality. She had told herself all of that, and then she had lain awake until past 2 a.m. running the names from the black folder through her memory. Because she had a near photographic recall for written text, her mother had always said it was her strangest and most useful quality. And she had read those first 2 pages in the hut with enough focus that the names were still there, crisp and complete, when she closed her eyes. 2 she recognized from financial media, standard high-profile corporate names in the sole business world. 1 she recognized from that overheard call. That one had a different weight, because she had heard Yura's voice when she said it. That low, controlled register that was not the voice Yura used with anyone in the household. It was the voice she used with someone she was accountable to. Not afraid of. Accountable. The difference, again, was specific, and it mattered. The name was Shin Woo-suk. She had looked him up that morning, the moment she woke before the message about the fire arrived. There was not much on the surface, which, she had learned from living inside wealthy households, was itself information. Men with extensive public profiles are men who want to be known. Men with almost none, at this level of apparent influence, have made a decision about visibility. Shin Woo-suk had a single listed directorship in a mid-sized logistics firm. 1 photo from an industry dinner 3 years prior. No interviews. No social presence. No controversy attached to his name anywhere that a standard search would surface. And yet his name was at the base of every corporate chain in Daejin's binder. She thought about that. About what it means to be the root of a structure that no one documents. About the kind of patience and infrastructure it takes to feed a woman the precise information she needs to dismantle her husband's public empire without ever appearing in the room yourself. About what you want from a man once he has been publicly stripped and everyone believes he has nothing left. She thought about what Daejin had said. A weakened man is useful. A destroyed one is a dead end. Shin Woo-suk had not wanted Daejin destroyed. He had wanted him reduced, controllable, cornered, dependent on whatever arrangement Shin Woo-suk offered next. A man who has lost everything publicly tends to take the lifeline that arrives quietly. That was the logic. That was the play. But Daejin had not lost everything. And now the fire told her something crucial. Whoever ran the surveillance on that estate already knew that. Knew the hut was there or had been there. Knew something had been missed in the transfer. And had sent the fire as a first move. Not to destroy, but to test whether the hut was still operational. Whether Daejin was still in proximity. Whether he had found a way to stay. The fire was a question. It was also a warning. And if Daejin had moved the contents of the hut before the fire reached it, which was the only explanation for the surveyor finding nothing of value, then he had been expecting that question. He had anticipated the timeline with the same precision he had used to build the whole structure. He was already 3 moves ahead, but 3 moves ahead only works if the other side doesn't change the game entirely. Zariah's phone rang. Unknown number. Korean country code, Seoul prefix. She almost didn't answer. She answered. Silence first. Then, they know you were in the eastern section. Daejin's voice, controlled as always, but with an edge underneath it that had not been there in the hut. They have a photo of you walking back through the second garden wall. How? Drone. Small. Consumer grade. Something that wouldn't flag the property security sensors. A pause. They are thorough. Do they know what I saw? Not yet, but they're running your background now. Employment records, visa status, residential address. Zariah's jaw set. Her apartment address was on every contract she had signed with the household staff agency, findable in under an hour by anyone with the right access. I need you to leave your apartment today, Daejin said. Not forever, not visibly, just tonight. And go where? He gave her an address, a district on the city's eastern edge near the river. A building name, an apartment number. He said the key would be in the electrical panel on the second-floor landing, taped to the inside of the door. She wrote nothing down. She remembered it. Daejin. She used his name the same way he had used hers. What exactly is Shin Woo-sok planning to do when he realizes you're still standing? The pause that followed was not long, but it was complete. That's the question I've been building the answer to, he said, for the last 3 years. The line ended. Zariah stood in her kitchen with her phone face down on the counter and looked at the window. The city outside was doing what it always did, moving forward, indifferent, enormous, full of lives running their own separate equations. She thought about her mother. Never let the world make you small. She picked up her keys. Shin Woo-sok built this entire trap for Daejin, fed the information to Yura, arranged the divorce, stripped the visible empire, and now sent fire when he realized something was missed. But here is the thing. Daejin has been building the answer to this for 3 years. 3 years. Which means the divorce, the courtroom, the total public loss, all of it was Daejin setting a trap of his own. So who is actually in the trap? Leave your thoughts below. Chapter 8 is where the walls close in, and Zariah stops being a witness. Chapter 8. The false report came through at 9 the next morning. Zariah saw it on her phone while sitting in the apartment Daejin had directed her to. A clean, spare unit near the Han River that smelled like fresh paint and nothing else, the kind of space that had been prepared without personality on purpose. She had slept 4 hours. She was on her second cup of instant coffee and had been watching the city come alive through the floor-to-ceiling window when the notification arrived from the staffing agency. A formal conduct inquiry. Her name. Her employee number. A complaint filed by an unnamed party alleging that she had removed items from the Kang estate during the final staff clearance. The complaint was dated yesterday, filed at 6 in the evening, 1 hour after the fire in the eastern section was logged and closed. She read it 3 times. It was clean work, not crude. The language was professional, the filing channel was legitimate, and the timing was precise enough that it would look to anyone reviewing it like a routine post-assignment dispute rather than what it actually was. A mechanism. A way to freeze her professional standing, flag her visa-linked employment status, and create a paper trail that put her credibility in question before she could put anyone else's credibility in question. Whoever filed this knew how she lived here, knew that her right to remain in Korea was tied to active employment, knew that a formal conduct complaint, even an unproven one, would require a response period during which her agency would suspend her from new placements. They weren't trying to destroy her. They were trying to keep her still. She closed the notification, set the phone face down, looked at the river. Her first instinct was to call the agency immediately, dispute it, get ahead of it. That was the rational move for someone who had done nothing wrong and had the documentation to prove it. She still had her signed inventory from yesterday. She had photos. Standard practice, she always photographed completed rooms at the close of an assignment. Every item accounted for. Nothing taken. But the rational move assumed good faith on the other side, and she was operating in a system where good faith had been removed as a variable. She picked the phone back up and called Daejin. He answered on the second ring. She told him about the complaint. He listened without interrupting. "They moved faster than I expected on you," he said when she finished. "That means they're worried." "Worried about what? They don't know what I saw." "They know you were in the section. They know I'm not where they expected me to be. And they know you spent time alone in the east section of an estate where a non-documented structure was located." His voice was level. "For Shin Woo-sok's team, that combination is enough to treat you as a potential problem. A problem they're trying to legally box in. Yes, and if the conduct complaint doesn't hold, they'll use something else. They have access to city systems through 3 different procurement channels: licensing, immigration, municipal records." A pause. "They are not amateurs." She absorbed that. "What do I do about the agency?" "Nothing yet. Do not respond to the complaint today." Every hour you don't respond looks, from the outside, like you're consulting a lawyer, which is the correct behavior for someone who intends to fight it through proper channels. It buys time without showing your hand. She hadn't thought of it that way. She filed it. And the men they had watching the estate, are they watching this building? Not yet. You arrived here without your phone active and on foot, which breaks the standard tracking methodology. They'll rebuild your location within 24 to 48 hours through other means. But you have a window. A window for what? He didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice had shifted, not softer but more direct. The register of a man moving from strategy to instruction. I need to meet you tonight. Not here. There's a place near Seongsu, a printing facility closed on weekends, 3rd floor. I'll send the address through the channel we used before. Come at 8. Come on foot from the northern entrance to the district, not from the main road. What are we doing? Finishing what you started when you opened that door. She wanted to push back on that framing. She hadn't started anything. She had followed a question. But she let it go because the line between following a question and starting something had, she accepted, dissolved somewhere in the last 18 hours. Daejin, she kept her voice even. There were men circling the property this morning, not just the one from the tree line. Mrs. A Song contacted me. She said 2 men came to the front gate asking questions about the final staff clearance schedule. Silence on his end, brief but present. She didn't let them in, Zariah continued. She said they were polite, said they were from an insurance assessment firm. She knew they weren't. Mrs. Song sees clearly, he said. She's been seeing clearly for 30 years. That's not the point. The point is they're asking about the staff clearance, which means they're working backwards, trying to establish who was in that eastern section and whether anything was removed before the fire. Were you the only staff member assigned to that area? Yes. Another pause. Longer. Then we move tonight, he said. 8 o'clock. She agreed. The call ended. She sat with the river in front of her and the phone in her hand and worked through the shape of what she was inside. The false complaint was a box. The circling men were a perimeter. The drone photo was a data point in a system that was currently running her name through every accessible record in the city. And somewhere in all of this, Daejin was doing exactly what he had said he was building toward for 3 years. She needed to know what that was, not the outline of it, the actual thing, because she was not a piece to be moved across someone else's board. She had not survived Brixton and a 2,000-mile relocation and 2 years of invisibility in someone else's home to become a variable in a game she didn't understand. She was going to understand it. All of it. At 7:50 that evening, she left the apartment through the service exit, walked north for 12 minutes, crossed the district boundary on foot, and arrived at the printing facility with 4 minutes to spare. The 3rd floor light was already on, and as she pushed through the stairwell door, she heard something she was not prepared for. Daejin's voice, low, strained in a way she had never heard it, and beneath it, the specific quality of silence that a person makes when they are trying very hard not to let the person in the room know how much they are hurting. She moved faster, came through the door, and found him on the floor against the far wall, jacket off, left sleeve pushed up, a long gash across his forearm wrapped roughly in what used to be a white handkerchief and was no longer anywhere close to white. He looked up at her. I said 8 o'clock, he said. His voice was even. His face was gray. It is 8 o'clock, she said, and crossed the room. The man who had walked through a courtroom like he was watching the weather had been cut badly recently and had come here anyway, alone, and had not called anyone. He had simply sat on the floor and waited and kept his voice level on the phone because control, she was beginning to understand, was not just a strategy for Kang Daejin. It was the only way he knew how to exist. She dropped her bag and knelt beside him, and the 9 floors of precision and strategy that this man had built around himself came down in this moment to a gash on his forearm and a woman who had followed a question all the way to the answer and decided, somewhere along the way, to stay inside it. Someone got to Daejin before tonight's meeting, someone who knew exactly where he would be. Think about what that means. His location was compromised. His movements are being tracked, and he still came, still made the call, still held the plan together while he was bleeding on a floor. Who do you think sold his location? And do you think Zariah is safe in that building right now? Tell me what you think. Chapter 9 is where everything human in this story comes forward. Chapter 9. She worked without asking permission. That was the first thing. She did not look up at him for approval or wait for instruction. She opened her bag, pulled out the small first aid kit she had carried for years out of a habit formed in her mother's flat where plasters and gauze were as standard as salt and pepper, and she got to work. She unwrapped the soaked handkerchief carefully, assessed the wound with the same focused attention she brought to everything, and pressed clean gauze to it with a firm, even hand. He flinched once, only once, then went completely still. "Keep pressure on that," she said, and moved his right hand over the gauze to hold it. She began opening the adhesive strips. "It's not as bad as it looks," he said. "It's a 3-inch gash on a forearm that hasn't been properly cleaned. It's exactly as bad as it looks." She reached into the kit without breaking focus. "What happened?" A pause. "Someone was waiting in the first-floor stairwell of the building I came from. They weren't there to talk." "Did they follow you here?" "No." "You're sure?" "I doubled back twice through the market district and came in through the loading entrance. If they had a tail on me at that point, I would have seen it." She accepted that, cleaned the wound with antiseptic. He made no sound. She worked the strips across it with precise pressure, closed the edges cleanly, and wrapped a fresh bandage over the full length. Not clinical hospital quality, but competent, secure. When she was done, she sat back on her heels and looked at him. He was watching her. Had been the entire time. Not with the analytical quality she was used to from him, not running an assessment, just watching, the way a person watches something that surprises them without knowing how to name the surprise. "You carry a first aid kit," he said. "My mother worked nights. I was alone a lot as a kid. You learn to handle small emergencies yourself." She began packing the kit back up. "Sit properly. A floor is cold." He shifted, moved to sit with his back straight against the wall, legs extended, the bandaged arm resting across his knee. The gray had eased slightly from his face now that the bleeding was addressed. The control was already coming back. She could see it settling over him again, compartment by compartment, like a system rebooting. She sat cross-legged on the floor at a right angle to him. Not close, not distant. The middle distance of two people who had moved past the formality of chairs. "Tell me what tonight was supposed to be," she said. He was quiet for a moment. Then he exhaled. Not dramatically, not as a performance. Just air leaving a body that had been holding itself together past the point of comfort for a long time. "I was going to show you the secondary archive," he said. "Copies of the primary materials from the hut, relocated 3 nights ago to a facility I've used before. Everything that was moved before the fire." He looked at his arm briefly. "The plan was to walk you through the evidence structure so that if anything happened to me, a second person would understand exactly what it meant and where to take it." Zariah let that settle. "You were going to make me a failsafe." "I was going to give you a choice. There's a difference." "Is there? You'd already calculated that I'd say yes." He looked at her directly. "No. I calculated that you were the kind of person who would make the decision clearly, whichever way it went. That was the quality I needed. Not compliance, clarity." She held his gaze. Outside, the city moved and murmured 6 floors below them. A distant truck, a siren somewhere east. The ordinary sounds of a place that had no idea what was happening in this specific room. "What did it cost you?" she asked. "All of it. Not the money. The actual cost." He didn't answer right away. She had expected that. Expected him to redirect, to reframe it as a strategic question, to keep the personal portion behind the wall he had clearly built around it and maintained for years. But he didn't. 3 years of watching someone I had chosen to trust become a different person, he said. Not with bitterness, with the flat accuracy of someone who has already completed the grieving and arrived at the fact. Yura wasn't always what she became, or maybe she was and I didn't look closely enough at the beginning. I've stopped trying to resolve that question. It doesn't change the outcome. Did you love her? A silence that was its own kind of answer. Then, I respected her. In the beginning, that felt like the same thing. Zariah nodded. She understood that particular confusion from the inside. The 3 years, she said. You were building the archive, building the legal structures, building the network. Were you doing all of that because you knew the marriage was ending or because you already knew about Shin Woo-sok? Both, he said. Shin Woo-sok made contact 18 months into the marriage. Indirectly, the way he does everything. A business introduction through an intermediary, an invitation to a private forum that certain people in this city attend and never discuss publicly. He was testing my profile, seeing whether I was the kind of man who could be recruited or the kind who needed to be neutralized. He paused. I was neither, which made me a problem he decided to solve through Yura. He turned your marriage into a mechanism. He needed me publicly reduced. Yura needed leverage she didn't know she was being handed. They were useful to each other without Yura ever understanding the full shape of the arrangement. He looked at the floor for a moment, then back up. She is not innocent. She made choices, but she was also moved, and she didn't know who was moving her. Zariah thought about the woman in the cream silk blouse, the smile that didn't reach the eyes, the measured heel strikes on the marble floor. She's going to realize something is missing, Zariah said. She probably already has. Yes, and when she does, she'll go to Shin Woo-sok. She already has. That call happened yesterday afternoon. He said it without emphasis, the way you say a thing you already knew was coming. How do you know? He looked at her with the particular quality of patience that a very private person extends when they are about to share the thing that explains everything. Because I still have 2 people inside his communication structure, people who have been there for 2 years, people he doesn't know are there. He shifted his arm carefully. The archive is not just financial evidence, Zariah. It is communication records, internal correspondence, instruction chains. Everything Shin Woo-sok said to Yura, through every intermediary he used, is documented and traceable. The entire construction of the plan that took my company. She stared at him. You've had the evidence the whole time. Yes. Then why? She stopped, restarted. Why didn't you use it before the divorce, before the court case? You could have exposed a mid-tier section of his network, yes. Had the relevant accounts frozen, possibly. Presented enough to create a legal case that his attorneys would have dismantled within 6 months because the jurisdictional complexity alone would have delayed proceedings past the statute window. He kept his voice even. Or I could let the divorce proceed. Let him believe the operation was complete. Let him move his full network structure into active mode, because a man who believes he has already won stops being careful. And a man who stops being careful starts to show you the parts he never intended you to see. The room was very quiet. You let it all happen, she said slowly, so that he would show you the rest of the network. I needed the complete picture, not a section of it. He met her eyes. I have it now. Or I did, until tonight told me the timeline has moved faster than I intended. Because they know you're still standing. Because they know something was missed, and they are now operating on urgency rather than patience. And urgency is when people make the mistakes that matter. She looked at his arm, at the bandage, clean and properly applied, at the man behind it, not broken, not defeated, not even especially frightened. Tired, yes. Carrying something enormous, yes, but still entirely present, still thinking. That's still exactly who he had chosen to be in that courtroom when everyone in the room thought they were watching a man lose. You have to tell me the rest, she said. All of it. Not the outline, the actual structure. What you need, what it does, where it goes. Because I am in this, not by accident anymore, by decision, and I need to understand what I'm deciding. He looked at her for a long moment. Why are you helping me? He asked. It was the same question she had asked herself for the last 18 hours. She had several answers, and none of them were the whole answer, so she gave him the one that was most true. "Because you're the first person in a long time," she said, "who treated what I see as something worth accounting for." The room held that. And in the quiet between two people sitting on a cold floor in a building no one knew they were in, something shifted. Not loudly, not with ceremony, just the way a compass finds north, without drama, without announcement, because it has no choice. It is simply what it is built to do. He reached into his jacket with his good arm, pulled out a small drive, set it on the floor between them. "This is the entry point," he said. "Everything else connects from here." She picked it up, held it, and the war, which had been his alone for 3 years, quietly became something shared. You felt that, didn't you? The moment it shifted between them. Not romance, something more foundational than that. The moment one person's survival becomes two people's decision. Daejin has the full evidence. Zariah now has the entry point. Shin Woo-suk is moving on urgency. What happens next is not going to be quiet. Leave your thoughts below. Chapter 10 is the turn you have been waiting for. Chapter 10. She opened the drive at 2 in the morning. Daejin had given her the access credentials verbally, a layered passphrase, 12 characters, no pattern a standard algorithm would solve in under a decade. She entered it once, and the drive unlocked cleanly. No second attempt needed. She had it exactly right, and the fact that she did told him something she hadn't needed to say aloud. He was sitting across the room at the printing facility's single work table, his injured arm elevated on a folded cloth, watching her scroll through the first directory level on the laptop they had connected the drive to. His face in the low light was composed, but not closed. Well, for the first time in the entire span of what they had moved through together, he was not calculating the value of sharing. He had already made the decision. He was simply watching it become real. She moved through the files without rushing. She had the quality, rare, he had found in people who encountered large quantities of information under pressure, of reading with comprehension rather than speed. She was not skimming for the dramatic detail. She was building a structure in her mind, layer by layer, letting each document inform the next the way you assemble a case rather than consume a story. He let her work. After 20 minutes, she leaned back, not finished, not even close, but pausing with the look of someone who needs to stand on the first landing before continuing up a long staircase. "The communication chains," she said. "Shin Woo-suk never appears directly. Never. Always through 2 or 3 intermediaries. Always with language clean enough to be interpreted as standard business instruction. The context is everything. The meaning is in the pattern, not the individual message. And you have the pattern documented. Every exchange, cross-referenced to the corporate action that followed each communication. There are 41 documented instances over an 18-month period where a message from Shin Woo-suk's network was followed within 48 hours by a specific action in either Yura's legal strategy or the asset documentation process." She looked at the screen. 41 instances. 41. Any 3 of them, presented correctly to the right jurisdiction, establishes the framework. All 41 create something a defense team cannot dismantle. She was quiet for a moment. Where does this go? What is the correct jurisdiction? Because if his network has access to city licensing, immigration, municipal systems, it doesn't go domestic, he said. Korea is too compromised at the relevant administrative levels. It goes to 3 places simultaneously. The Financial Crimes Unit of the International Task Force that has had an open inquiry into related syndicate activity for the last 4 years. A specific investigative journalist at a global outlet who has been building a separate story on Shell Corporation misuse in Pacific Rim jurisdictions, and a regulatory body in Switzerland where 3 of the holding companies are registered and where his network has no existing influence. Zariah absorbed this. Oh, simultaneous. Simultaneous. Because if one channel receives it first, they have time to apply pressure to the others before the information becomes public. Simultaneous removes that window. And you've had the means to do this for how long? He met her eyes. 6 weeks. She stared at him. 6 weeks. I was waiting for one final piece, confirmation of the domestic political connections, which arrived in the last communication my contacts inside his network intercepted, 3 days before the divorce was finalized. He paused. The timing of the fire told me they know the plan has moved, which means the window I had calculated has shortened. How short? Days, not weeks. She closed the laptop, turned to face him fully. The room between them was small now, not physically, but in the way rooms get small when everything unnecessary has been removed from them. You've been doing this alone, she said, not as an accusation, as a recognition. Yes, for 3 years. Yes. She looked at the drive in her hand, then at him, and she saw it then. Not the strategy, not the architecture, not the composed executive who had walked through a courtroom like he was watching someone else's problem. She saw the actual cost of 3 years of complete operational silence, of being the only person who knew the full shape of something this large, of watching your own life be publicly dismantled and staying still and staying quiet and trusting the structure you built alone to hold. That kind of discipline does not come without a price. She set the drive on the table between them. I can take the journalist channel, she said. I have a contact, someone I know from a media fellowship I attended in London 4 years ago before Seoul. She's at a major international outlet now. She's been working on Pacific Rim financial exposure for 2 years. I know her work, I know her standard. She held his gaze. And I'm outside your network entirely, which means if his people are monitoring your channels, they won't see me coming. Daejin was very still. You're not a variable I planned for, he said. No, she said. I'm the one you didn't plan for, which is exactly why it works. The silence that followed was different from every silence that had come before it. Not the silence of assessment, not the silence of calculation, the silence of 2 people standing at the edge of the same decision and recognizing, without needing to say it, that they have already crossed it. If you do this, he said quietly, you are not the help anymore. You are not uninvolved. There is no position that keeps you safe once this becomes active. I know. Zariah. I know, she said again, steadier. I've been making decisions with full consequences since I was 15 years old. Don't soften the ask. Tell me what you need. He looked at her for a long time. Not the way he looked at a document or a strategy or a problem to be solved. The way a person looks at something that arrived without warning and turned out to matter more than they were prepared for. I need you to be exactly what you are, he said. Nothing more, nothing less. She picked the drive back up. Then we move in 48 hours, she said. He nodded. And for the first time since the gavel came down in that courtroom, the first time since 19 years of carefully constructed life was handed across a room to a woman in a cream silk blouse. Kang Daejin looked like a man who was not carrying the weight alone. Not because someone had saved him, because someone had chosen to stand in the same place. And that, it turns out, changes everything. She's not the help anymore. He's not alone anymore. And Shin Woo-sok has no idea that the variable he never accounted for is now the one holding the entry point to everything. 48 hours. That's all they have. What do you think happens next? Who do you think moves first? Daejin, Zariah, or Shin Woo-sok? Leave your thoughts below. The final chapter is next, and nothing ends the way you expect. Chapter 11. The 48 hours passed like held breath. Zariah sent the first contact to her journalist connection at 6 in the morning on the second day. A message through an encrypted channel she had set up at Daejin's instruction, brief and specific, using a reference from a conversation she and the journalist had shared years ago in London that no surveillance system would recognize as meaningful. A private signal. The reply came back in under 3 hours. I'm listening. Send it clean. She sent the package. Every document, every communication chain, every cross-referenced instance. 41, all of them, along with the archive locations of the physical materials, the drive codes, and the regulatory filings Daejin had prepared simultaneously for the Swiss jurisdiction and the International Task Force. 3 channels. and opened at the same hour, on the same morning, with the same information moving through all of them at once. Shin Woo-sok would not know where to apply pressure because the information was already everywhere he would need to stop it. That was the design. Daejin activated the financial network the same morning. Not loudly, not with announcements. The offshore holding structures, the layered equity positions, the silent partnerships that had existed in parallel to the life the court had dismantled. They began moving, quietly, with the precision of a mechanism that had been built to wait and then, when released, to work exactly as intended. Money moves faster than news. News moves faster than law. And law, when it arrives from 3 directions at once, does not negotiate the way it does when it arrives from one. Zariah watched the first report surface 4 days later. She was in the East Side apartment, coffee in hand, the morning news running on her laptop with the sound low. A financial outlet, not her journalist contact's publication, that one came later, broke a story about an international inquiry into a web of Pacific Rim shell corporations linked to procurement fraud across 4 jurisdictions. The story named 3 corporate structures. 2 of them she recognized from Daejin's binder. The third was the logistics firm where Shin Woo-seok held his single listed directorship. His name appeared in the 7th paragraph. Buried, almost. The way names get buried when editors are still confirming the breadth of what they are holding and don't yet want to lead with the top. But it was there. Zariah read that paragraph 3 times. Then she texted Daejin one word, 7. His reply came in under a minute. I see it. The journalist contact's story ran 6 days after that. Global outlet, front page of the digital edition, with a headline that did not bury anything. It named Shin Woo-sok in the 2nd sentence and laid out in the careful, airtight language of a reporter who had been building this for 2 years and now had 41 documented instances of coordination to support it. The full construction. How a private citizen with no public profile had used shell structures across 6 jurisdictions to engineer the controlled demolition of a competitor's visible empire. How he had weaponized a divorce proceeding to do it. How the plan had assumed total success because it had accounted for every variable except one. The story did not name Zariah. She had insisted on that. Daejin had not argued. Yura's empire began its unwinding on a Tuesday. Not with drama, with the particular quiet of legal processes activating, freezes on accounts connected to structures now under inquiry, regulatory holds on recent asset transfers, attorneys filing motions that other attorneys would spend the next several months responding to. Yura had taken everything Shin Woo-sok had wanted her to take, and in doing so had positioned herself at the center of a transfer that was now the subject of a 3-jurisdiction investigation. She had not planned for this. She had planned for a clean acquisition and a new life built on a foundation she believed she had found herself. She had been moved, and she hadn't known it. And now the consequences were arriving not for the person who had moved her, not yet, but for the structure she had been placed inside. It was not justice, not cleanly. It was the complicated, imperfect shape that truth takes when it finally surfaces after being held underwater for years. Some of it was fair. Some of it wasn't. All of it was real. Daejin watched it from a distance. He did not engage with the media. He did not make statements. He let the structure he had built do the work it was designed to do, and he stayed out of the frame. Not because he was hiding, but because he understood, as he had always understood, that the person who controls the story is rarely the one standing in front of the camera. Shin Woo-sok's response was 4 days of silence, followed by a statement through his legal team that denied all connection to the documented communications and asserted that the evidence had been fabricated by a party with a financial interest in the outcome. His attorneys were good. They would extend the timeline. They would complicate the jurisdictional questions. They would do everything that expensive legal defense does when the evidence is real, but the process is long. But the 41 instances were 41. And they were public. And once something is public and real, it does not go back into the dark regardless of how long the legal process takes. Daejin had known this from the beginning. The law was not the point. The exposure was the point. A man whose entire power structure depends on invisibility cannot operate in the light. He had nowhere left to move where the light wasn't already waiting. On a Sunday evening, 3 weeks after the package had moved through all 3 channels, Zariah returned to the East Side apartment and found the door unlocked. She was not startled. She went in. Daejin was there, standing at the window looking at the river. Not in the dark clothes she had come to associate with the in-between weeks of movement and urgency. In something ordinary. Dark trousers, a plain sweater, the sleeves pushed to the elbow, the bandaged arm now wrapped only in a thin skin-colored strip, the wound closed and healing. He turned when she came in. She set her bag down, shrugged off her jacket. "The Swiss filing completed today," she said. "I know. The task force issued their preliminary response this afternoon." He turned back to the window briefly, then looked at her again. "It's going to hold." "I know it's going to hold." She moved to the small kitchen counter and filled the kettle. "I read the filing language this morning. It holds." Ordinary sounds. Water into kettle, kettle onto the base, the city through the glass, moving in its way. "Your conduct complaint at the agency was dropped yesterday," he said. "I had a confirmation from the regulatory side. The party that filed it withdrew it under the inquiry into their associated structures." She nodded. She had seen the email. "Your journalist contact published the follow-up piece this morning," he added. "I read it." "She used your characterization. The one you gave her about how evidence structures depend on the person with no agenda being the one who sees the pattern first." Zariah looked at him. "She asked me to explain how it came together. I told her the truth." "You told her a version without your name in it." "The story doesn't need my name. The story needs to be understood." He was quiet for a moment, looking at her in that way he had developed. Not analytical, not strategic, something more honest than both. "Zariah." He said her name the way he had in the estate corridor, like it was the specific word for a specific thing, not just a label. She looked at him. "Why are you still here?" he asked. And this time it was not a calculation, not a test. It was the actual question, the one underneath everything that had passed between them since she stood in a courtroom hallway holding a dry cleaning bag and watched a man refuse to react to the loss of everything. She thought about it honestly, which was the only way she knew how to think. "Because you never asked me to leave," she said. He was silent. The kettle began to hum. "Stay," he said. One word. And she had heard him speak in full architectural sentences about corporate law across 6 jurisdictions. She had heard him give instructions that moved money and evidence and people into position with total precision. She had heard his voice low and strained on a cold floor while she closed a wound on his arm. This was the simplest thing he had ever said to her. Not a command, not a plan, not a calculated move. An invitation issued by a man who had spent 3 years operating alone and had discovered, in the last several weeks, that operating alongside someone with no agenda and a near photographic memory and a first aid kit in her bag and her mother's voice in her ear and a backbone that did not bend under pressure was different, better, real in a way that strategy on its own is not. She turned and looked at him fully. The river behind him. The evening light. The city moving on, indifferent and enormous, doing what cities do. "Daejin," she said, "I'm not going anywhere." He didn't smile. He was not a man who smiled easily or often, but something in his face settled. The last layer of guard, the one he probably hadn't even known he was still holding, released. And what was underneath it was simply a man. Tired, yes. Marked by 3 years of necessary silence, but standing, present, there. They stood on opposite sides of a small apartment kitchen with the river outside and the kettle beginning to whistle, and the world outside completely unaware that in this room, on this evening, The war that Shin Woo-seok had designed to end a man had instead done something its architect had never once considered. It had produced the only alliance he had never accounted for. Not built on wealth, not built on power, built on truth, on survival, and on the particular kind of trust that forms only between people who have seen each other fully and decided to stay. The story the world told about Kang Daejin was that he lost everything. He hadn't lost everything. He had shed everything that wasn't real. And what remained was in a room above the Han River on a Sunday evening, with the kettle whistling and the case building toward a reckoning that would take years to complete but could not now be stopped, was more than what the world had measured, more than any court could value. Something quiet, earned, and entirely his own. And Zariah Cole, who had come to Seoul on a promise she made to her late mother, never let the world make you small, stood in her own fullness, having found the thing her gift of seeing had always been moving her toward. Not a hidden hut, not an evidence archive, not even the exposure of a man who had believed himself untouchable. The moment where what you see and what you know and who you are finally lands in a place that was worth the distance to reach it. This is where the story began to end, and where the next one begins. Thank you for staying through every chapter of this story. If something in this moved you, share it with someone who needs it. And if you have not subscribed yet, do it right now and turn on notifications so you never miss what comes next on Afro-Korean Films HQ. Every story we tell here is built to mean something. Leave your thoughts in the comments. Your voice in this space is part of what makes it worth building. We read everything, and we will see you in the next one.